This morning, I am going to preach a sermon about sermons. Yes, I may have just blown your mind. My most meta sermon yet. But before I do that, I would like to tell you a story. This is a story, many of you may know I grew up in Iowa, the Midwest, the flyover states. Iowa is famous for its bridges of Madison County and its fields of dreams. I have been to both of them. And it's also filled with farms. Now, my best friend named Dan, he lived on a farm. So this is a story about Farmer Dan. It's a story I'm hijacking from a friend named Peter Rollins, and it's a not-so-true story, but it might be if you think about it long enough. Farmer Dan was entering a competition to build a pig pen. Now, there were three contestants. There was a mathematician, there was an engineer, and there was Farmer Dan. They were all given the same supplies, the same amount of lumber, and they were told to build the biggest, strongest pen to hold the most amount of pigs. If you don't know what a pig is, it's like a rat, but bigger, by the way. Talking to New Yorkers here. Now, the mathematician calculates how to best use the supplies she has available. And so she creates this circumference that maximizes the amount of room possible for her pig pen. Not bad. The judges look at it, they're impressed. Next, the engineer. The engineer evaluates the structural integrity of the wood, finds out exactly how to divide each board in half and maintain their structural integrity, thus doubling the amount of resources and the amount of space provided. The judges look at that and go, that's pretty good. And then they come to Farmer Dan, who is standing inside a 1 foot by 1 foot square with a pile of supplies untouched. And they go, Farmer Dan, did you understand the competition? You were supposed to build the largest possible pig pen. Farmer Dan says, oh yes, I understood. I'm not standing in the pig pen, you are. Sometimes the way we see things needs to shift, to be flipped upside down, just like a sermon can do. But let's hold on 1 second to get there. Let's talk more about the way we see things. I would like to introduce you to the first episode of Sermon Science Theater. I need my lab assistants to join me up here at the pulpit. Intern, lab assistant, it's synonymous. Now, I want to make sure all of us, from youngest to oldest, understand exactly how seeing things works. We see the world, or at least we think we do, but when you dig into the science, let's see, what does it actually look like? Let's see. Look at that. Cirque de Middle. All right, hold it, freeze, good work. Your eye sees the world like this. The way it is curved, light enters it, and your eye forms everything you see like this. And then your brain figures out how to turn it right side up. Believe it or not, but we see the world like this. This is just how we exist. Okay, that's good. You can stop now. Thank you to my lab assistants. The light enters your eye, bounces off the back. The way it's curved, it just flips the image. But your brain has perceptual adaptation, meaning it has the ability to turn it right side up. Farmer Dan building a little 1 foot by 1 foot square. Some people see that and think it's upside down, but some people know how to turn it right side up. Your eyes see everything upside down, and it gets turned right side up. A sermon shifts the way you see the world. The sermon shifts things so that you can see them right side up. The handstand becomes back on your feet. The pig pen is bigger than you ever would have realized. A sermon allows you to see the world in such a way. Now, the text that Jay read was a sermon. It's from a portion in Scripture called the Sermon on the Mount. This, as far as we can tell according to the narrative of the New Testament, is the first recorded sermon Jesus preaches. It's actually part of a longer sermon. It's about 3 chapters long, 111 verses. You just heard 12 of them. And it's most likely a collection of sermons that he preached over the course of his ministry that were collected and assembled into a single unit. And this morning we heard, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." This sermon, I believe, needs to be turned upside down. Here's what I mean by that. When I grew up hearing this sermon, the Beatitudes, I assumed you were supposed to read them a certain way, meaning it's something I should aspire towards. It is a prescription, a how-to list. If I want to be blessed, I need to be more like the things listed. But is that grace? A imposition of a how-to list? Also, the constant questions I had as an adolescent to ask, what does it mean to be poor in spirit? Well, I read a book by a man named Dallas Willard called The Divine Conspiracy that turned this passage right side up for me. It helped me realize I had been seeing it upside down. When I was looking at it as a how-to list, when I was looking at it as a prescription, I was seeing this sermon upside down. And this man's work helped me see it right side up. Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 5 are not a how-to list. They are not a prescription prescribing how you should live. They are a description. Jesus stands on the mountain and sees the crowd. This crowd is a crowd of people who had been coming to him for help, a crowd of people who needed healing, relief, rest, someone to listen to them. And Jesus says, "Blessed are the people standing around me." The list Jesus offers are the people assembled in that crowd. Jesus isn't telling them, here's what you need to do in order to be blessed. Jesus is saying, blessed are you who volunteer last minute to join the butterfly ministry. Blessed are you who are willing to be part of a science experiment and do a handstand in front of 100, 200, 300, and who knows how many people online. Blessed are you who leave your apartment on a windy day like today to gather together in the warmth of this place. Jesus is looking at the people and calling them blessed, which turns things upside down. No, this turns things right side up, because the reality, the false reality that these people lived in was one that said they needed to be something else in order to be blessed. The false reality that Jesus is speaking to is one in which the poor in spirit, maybe it's just the poor, felt like they needed to have a certain level of income in order to make it. And Jesus looks at them and says, exactly as you are blessed. Perhaps we could hear these words written like this. A friend of mine rewrote these Beatitudes in a way that might help us understand how to receive them, as if Jesus were speaking to us instead of giving us a to-do list. Blessed are those who don't have it all together. Blessed are those who run out of strength, ideas, willpower, resolve, or energy. Blessed are those who ache because of how severely out of whack the world is. Blessed are those who stumble, trip, and fall in the same place again and again. Blessed are those who on a regular basis have a dark day in which despair seems to be a step behind them wherever they go. Blessed are you, for God is with you. God is on your side. God meets you in this place. The world, at times, needs to be turned right side up. Jesus' sermon, there's the question of what's he saying, and then there's the bigger question of what's he doing? And what he's doing is turning an upside-down world right side up. Let's take television, for example. About 5-10 years ago, and even still too often today, if you would have looked at the cast on television, on at least the major networks during prime time, there seemed to be a homogeneous nature, a sameness to the skin tone represented. And some people brought this to the attention of those networks and asked, hey, why does everyone seem to be a little bit pale? Where are the people of color on television? And the major networks said, that's a really great question. We're going to go look at what's happening in the casting. And the answer came down to, you know what? We're hiring the people who are just advancing through the ranks, and this is just who there is. That's an upside-down world. And so some people began to create networks and support groups that would help empower and raise up people of color in the midst of the acting world. So that when you turn on ABC now, you can see Olivia Pope solving the problems in Washington, and you can discover how to get away with murder. Sometimes there are things in the world that are upside down, and it is a call from God to live in a way to turn them right side up. I grew up in the church, like literally grew up in the church. My earliest memories are being pushed on my dad's office chair in the church basement. He was a pastor at the church. My mom was a teacher. I was always torn between these two callings of education and ministry, minister for education. Now, the church I worked at before I moved to New York helped me see things in a very stark, sad, abrasive way at times. And this is no offense to them. They were living in their context. But the churches that I was a part of, so much of the mainline historic churches in our country, they look a little pale-skinned and led by a particular gender expression. So I was at this church. I was a pastor at the church. It was a bigger church. I was at a pastor's meeting at the church. There were about 12 of us sitting around the table, and I remember exactly where I was sitting when I looked around this table and realized that 11 of us were men, all of us were white, and at least half of us had glasses just like this. I do not want to go to church to look in the mirror. That, to me, is an upside-down world. And at the same time, my wife, who some of you know, was studying to be a minister. And so when the day came when I put in my resignation to that church to support my wife as she received a call to West End Collegiate Church, it was one of the happiest days of my life. But I still was in this place thinking, well, I guess my days in the church are done because they're all just a little too white and male and straight for me. And then I met you. An upside-down world becomes a bit more right side up. Now, I'm not saying we're perfect. We got our baggage, and we'll deal with that in another sermon. But this upside-down world becomes a bit more right side up. This, I believe, is the sermon that Jesus is preaching. It's the sermon I think we need to be hearing, because it's the sermon I believe we need to be embodying in the world around us. Farmer Dan creates a little square, and if you know how to see it, suddenly the world is right side up. Jay does a headstand, and you realize that your eyes are always seeing the world one way, and it needs to be flipped to be right side up. If Jesus preached a sermon, I think his sermon might lead us to flip an upside-down world right side up. Now, we talked about this exact question. What kind of sermon would Jesus preach at our last pub theology gathering? They happen once a month across the street at Jimmy's number 43. A handful of you were there. And I asked the question, if Jesus would preach a sermon, what would he say? Now, you'll notice maybe in your bulletins there's space for you to have a similar exercise, and I would love to hear how you would capture the sermons that Jesus might say. But I wanted to read to you a few of the sermons that were written at our last gathering. If Jesus were to preach a sermon today, what would he say? Dudes, just be nice to each other. You be nice to him, you be nice to her. Sure, he's different than you, but maybe you can learn something from him if you get to know each other. Give it a shot. Let me know how it goes. Jesus out. No matter your condition or geographic location, whether you're on food stamps, paying with cash at Pathmark, or ordering from Fresh Direct, whether you're sitting on the stoop of a brownstone, standing in line at a shelter in Bushwick, or sitting on the ground at 59th and Lex with an outstretched hand, whether you're tired or poor, full of faith or dispirited, the universe says this: I will gather you into my arms. No one will be left behind. If Jesus preached a sermon, I'm pretty sure he would say a lot of what he said. He would not give us a how-to list, but he would continue, as these sermonettes I just shared exemplify, that we need to continue turning an upside-down world right side up. An upside-down world says you're only worth as much as your bank account, but a right-side-up world says you are fearfully and wonderfully made. An upside-down world shouts scarcity, but a right-side-up world says sufficiency. An upside-down world says, I want more. A right-side-up world says, everyone has enough. An upside-down world calls you other. A right-side-up world calls you sister and brother. An upside-down world says you will never be good enough. But a right-side-up world says you are loved exactly as you are. An upside-down world says that marriage is between a man and a woman. But a right-side-up world says that love is love, whether you love men, women, or both. An upside-down world is infected with racism. A right-side-up world sets out to cure racism. An upside-down world says that I am the center of the universe, but a right-side-up world says that I am because we are. An upside-down world says that God is nowhere, but a right-side-up world just moves those letters around a little bit to say God is now here. Friends, we live in an upside-down world. And you know what? It's not enough to just read a sermon Jesus spoke thousands of years ago. It's not even enough to just theorize about what Jesus might preach, because sermons are never meant to end with words. They are always meant to become actions. The word becomes flesh, and it looks a lot like you. You are the sermon that Jesus continues to preach. You are the good news that comes to life in the world around us. You are the glimpses of right side up in the midst of upside down. May we be people who each and every day discover a reign of God that creates the world around us to be a little bit more right side up. May it be so.